The sky was black with smoke. Frozen blood crusted the snow, limbs twisted in impossible angles, locked in death. And in the stillness, only the wind moved, howling across a riverbank littered with bodies. It was January 29th, 1863, and the U.S. Army had just carried out the deadliest massacre of Native Americans in Western history. And almost no one talks about it. The Shoshone people had lived in the northern Utah and southern Idaho valleys for generations. They hunted the plains, fished the rivers, traded in peace and war. But as white settlers pushed west along the Oregon Trail, tensions grew. Game disappeared. Grazing land was claimed. Treaties were promised, then forgotten. Some Shoshone retaliated. A wagon raided. A settler killed. The frontier was always on edge. But what came next was not justice. It was annihilation. In the bitter cold of late January, Colonel Patrick Edward Connor led over 200 California volunteers out of Camp Douglas near Salt Lake City. Their orders were vague: protect settlers, punish raiders. Connor had another goal: make a name for himself. He marched his troops through deep snow, across treacherous terrain, toward a small Shoshone village near the Bear River. It was home to Chief Bear Hunter, a respected leader who had gathered his people to ride out the winter, about 500 men, women, and children. They had no idea death was coming. At dawn, the soldiers opened fire. The first shots struck sleeping warriors. Others rushed out barefoot into the snow, grabbing whatever weapons they could. Some returned fire. Some tried to run, but Connor's men had the high ground and the advantage of surprise. The warriors fought back fiercely, even as they were surrounded. But it didn't matter. As the shooting continued, the soldiers moved in closer, through the willows, across the riverbank, bayonets fixed. And then it became something else. The army did not stop with the warriors. Women were dragged from hiding places and executed. Children were shot in the snow. Babies were torn from their mothers. One witness later wrote that infants were swung by their ankles and smashed against wagon wheels. Tents were burned, horses shot. The wounded were finished off where they lay. By mid-morning, the snow had turned red. Of the roughly 500 Shoshone in the village, as many as 350 were killed. Nearly 2/3 were women and children. Only a few dozen soldiers died, mostly from friendly fire or exposure. Connor called it a victory. He was promoted to brigadier general, but some of his own officers were shaken. One wrote in his journal that it was a sickening sight to see squaws shot down like dogs. Another called it a wholesale butchery. The survivors were left with nothing, their homes destroyed, their food supplies gone. Those who escaped faced starvation in the mountains. And history moved on. The massacre was quickly buried, first under snow, then under silence. The Civil War was raging back east. Headlines didn't linger on a remote Indian village in Idaho Territory. The U.S. Army never faced consequences. No inquiry, no trial, no reparations. The site became farmland, but the Shoshone never forgot. Elders passed the story down through generations, of the river that ran red, of the voices that still cry out on cold January nights. They called it Boa Ogoi, Big River, and they remembered the day when it became a grave. It wasn't until 2008, 145 years later, that the federal government formally recognized the Bear River site as a National Historic Landmark. There's no battlefield preserved, no monuments to the fallen, just wind, water, and the memory of what was taken. Thank you for listening to Deserted Trails. Subscribe for more forgotten stories from the old frontier.